0501, a swarm of Ukrainian kamikaze UAVs raced toward the Kakhovka Dam, a hydroelectric facility worth $8.7 billion under Russian control, a fortress Moscow believed was impregnable. In the thick fog blanketing the Dnipro River, Kyiv launched a bold military operation, targeting one of the most critical strategic assets in the south. The target wasn't the massive dam body, towering dozens of meters high, housing the France's turbine cluster and ultra-high voltage substation, but the SCADA control center, the brain, overseeing power flow and floodgates. There, a single direct hit would be enough to paralyze the entire facility's operations. Surrounding the dam was a dense defensive network, S-400 Triumphs guarding from afar, Kakhovka 4s blanketing the area with an electronic jamming bubble, Panzer S-1s pointing their 30mm barrels skyward, and Mi-28N Havoc helicopters ready to scramble. For years, Russia had viewed Kakhovka as a steel shield protecting an entire strategic sector. But at dawn this morning, that shield was challenged by a flock of cheap UAVs. How could they breach that billion-dollar defense layer? And how could a 1.5 kg UAV pierce the steel heart of Russia's fortress? 501. In the thick fog enveloping the Dnipro River's surface, 10 KH-7 kamikaze UAVs from the Ukrainian drone brigade glided forward at an altitude of just a few meters, their electric motors humming softly like mosquitoes in flight, the control screens clearly displaying the countdown clock. Less than 60 seconds until they approached the target, the $8.7 billion Kakhovka hydroelectric dam, the colossal energy fortress under Russian control. Ahead of them loomed the massive concrete structure, towering dozens of meters high and stretching nearly 4 kilometers, where the France's turbine cluster rumbled deep within the dam. The ultra-high voltage substation released electricity, powering a vast region, and above all, the digital SCADA control center, the brain of the entire system, where a single direct hit would turn the magnificent structure into a blind, useless block of concrete. Ukraine's objective wasn't to destroy the dam body and create an artificial flood disaster that could drown tens of thousands of lives, but to strike straight at the command center, paralyzing operations and monitoring, forcing Russia to pay the price for its belief that this fortress was impregnable. Surrounding the dam, Russia had erected a multi-layered defense system on the outer ring, S-400 Triumph complexes with 92 N6E gravestone radars capable of tracking hundreds of targets simultaneously, with a range up to 400 kilometers, ready to launch 48 N6DM missiles hurtling at Mach 6 speeds. Next came the Kakhovka 4 electronic warfare vehicles, specializing in jamming broadcast, creating an EW bubble with a radius of over 180 kilometers, turning the entire area into a silent sea, where radio signals were crushed into garbage right on the powerhouse roof. Each Panzer S-1, with its twin 30mm cannons and 57 E-6 missile launchers, pointed barrels skyward, awaiting low-flying targets. And at the nearby field airstrip, Mi-28N Havoc helicopters with GS-8 cannons and S-8 rockets stood ready, awaiting takeoff orders. On paper, this was a billion-dollar steel armor layer, strong enough to crush any threat. But that very armor became a deadly psychological trap. Russian troops believed nothing from cruise missiles to kamikaze UAVs would dare approach. They relaxed, grew lax, arrogant in their faith in the impregnable fortress. Ukraine had meticulously calculated to turn that complacency into a fatal blow. Over 90 days from radar signal reconnaissance nights, commercial satellite image analysis to small-scale UAV tests, every detail was arranged. The unmanned Marichka submarine would dive deep under the river, carrying UAVs to a safe launch point. The Ghost Team squad entrenched in Enerodar would secretly open a gap in the anti-UAV net. Upgraded Neptune missiles would take out indirect threats like rocket artillery. And finally, the cheap but smart KH-7 UAV swarm would deliver the decisive punch. Now the entire plan was packed into those tiny whirring propellers in the darkness. The only question left hanging: could a 1.5 kg UAV costing just $400 pierce the billion-dollar shield and paralyze the steel heart of the Kakhovka Dam? 0430, as the sky over the Dnipro River still lingered in the pale gray of early morning fog, 2 upgraded R-360 Neptune cruise missiles left their launchers from a camouflage position on the west bank, their jet engines roaring before quickly vanishing under the low clouds. They weren't headed for the dam, nor targeting Russia's air defense systems, but straight for the BM-30 Smerch 300mm MLRS launchers, positioned just a few kilometers from the Kakhovka Dam. That was the shotgun Russia planned to use to shred any daring UAV swarm, since a barrage of fragmentation rockets could turn the sky into a massive fire net. Less than 2 minutes later, reconnaissance cameras captured a fireball erupting, the entire launcher vehicle and reserve ammo blown to bits. With that opening strike, the most dangerous threat to the UAV swarm was eliminated from the board, while smoke from the explosion still billowed into the sky. A 6-man Ghost Team Special Forces unit began operating in Enerhodar, the town right next to the dam. They'd been entrenched for weeks, disguised as workers or civilians, secretly monitoring guard shifts and sensor positions. Tonight, they carried a handheld R934 BMV jammer, the type typically used for localized jamming. When activated, it created a jamming bubble with a radius of just about 20 meters, but enough to disable a segment of the dense anti-UAV net of steel wires and infrared sensors. On Russian monitoring screens, images from the sensor cluster turned into distorted, flickering streaks, like signals jammed by interference. Through the gap less than 5 meters wide that Ghost Team created, the Ukrainian UAV swarm would have its only path into the protected area, a death gate but also a birth gate. 5:01:30. As the KHS-7 UAV swarm closed in on the area, 2 of them broke formation, activating infrared lights and climbing to 500 meters. These were decoy UAVs carrying dummy warheads, deliberately broadcasting clear RF signals to attract the 92N6E gravestone radar of the S-400 Triumph complex. Immediately, 2 bright blips appeared on Russian radar screens. The air defense crew reported targets approaching from northwest, altitude 500 meters, low speed. The commander instantly ordered fire. 2 $1 million plus 48 N6DM missiles launched, their rocket motors creating 2 white streaks tearing through the sky. Just dozens of seconds later, both decoy UAVs turned to debris. The air defense crew cheered, believing they'd thwarted an attack. But in the darkness, the remaining 8 UAVs quietly skimmed the water surface, hiding in the radar clutter that the S-400 system was programmed to ignore to avoid false alarms from migrating birds. 05:02, the Kakhovka 4 began broadcasting at full power. The entire space around the dam was drowned in a thick wall of white radio waves, severing all normal signals. Yet the KHS-7s didn't fly on simple remote commands. Each carried a NVIDIA Jetson Nano chip running frequency hopping algorithms, jumping frequencies 1,000 times per second. Every time the Kakhovka jammed a channel, the UAV instantly switched to another, maintaining stable communication. More crucially, they also had optical navigation, cameras matching the terrain below with preloaded satellite maps, allowing meter-precise flight, even if GPS was completely jammed. With this dual system, the UAV swarm moved like ghosts, both hearing and seeing, threading through Russia's electronic net spectacularly. 05:02:15. High above, a Russian Orlan-10 detected a few unusual heat signatures flickering on the river surface. The pilot reported to command, possible low-altitude targets approaching via the river. Immediately, an order came to lower the radar scan angle. The radar beam swept close to the water, just seconds from locking onto the real UAV swarm. In the Ukrainian underground bunker, the control technicians were tense to the extreme, sweat pouring, eyes glued to the FPV screens, because if Russian radar caught them, the entire swarm would be exposed and destroyed. At that exact moment, Ghost Team delivered the decisive blow. They activated a homemade counter-EW device, a small black box hidden under the riverbank grass, emitting fake signals mimicking distorted Kakhovka waves. Within a few hundred meters around it, all Russian radars and EW gear could only hear a sea of chaos, as if dozens of fake sources screamed simultaneously, turning control screens into meaningless data mush. Russian officers stared at the radar band, bewildered as targets that had just flashed vanished like they'd never existed. In that brief gap of a few dozen seconds, the 8 real UAVs breached the outermost defense layer, crossed the gap Ghost Team created, and entered the dead airspace now controlled by Pantsir S-1s. The campaign's gate had opened, the feint complete. From the Neptune path-clearing strike, to the silent hand of special forces, to high-altitude decoys wasting $1 million S-400 shots, all the feints and unlocks had woven into a perfect symphony. Now, the only question left, could that tiny cheap UAV swarm survive the direct fire net to reach the steel heart of the Kakhovka Dam? 05:02. As the 8 KHS-7 UAVs slipped through the radar blind zone created by Ghost Team, the entire Russian close-range defense zone on the Kakhovka Dam sprang to life. The two A-38M autocannons mounted on Panzer S-1 complexes roared, barrels whirring wildly to unleash bursts of 30mm rounds at over 2,500 rounds per minute, red tracers crisscrossing the gray sky. The three lead UAVs were immediately flung apart like sparrows hit by buckshot, FPV cameras shaking violently before turning to blank white screens, signals lost completely. Dnipro River water erupted in tall columns like mine blasts, the tiny UAV wreckage vanishing in a metal rain. 0503-05. The TB317 VMA engine roar of the Mi-28N Havoc attack helicopter echoed from the field airstrip across the bank. The 11-ton steel beast charged in, its electro-optical sights locking onto the faint heat signatures from the UAV swarm. The GSH-32 cannon cracked relentlessly, strings of 30mm rounds like saw blades ripping the air. Two UAVs were swept clean, FPV signals flashing a streak of light before going dark. The remaining four hurriedly dropped to just 15 meters, skimming the river surface, hugging the radar clutter, forcing the Panzer systems to constantly readjust firing angles. In the Russian command bunker, air defense officers gritted their teeth, knowing full well these tiny targets weren't worth the $8.7 billion facility. But precisely because of that, the pressure mounted. No one dared order indiscriminate fire, since a stray burst hitting the concrete dam body could crack the structure, unleashing an uncontrollable disaster. The order came down clearly: fire only when certain the trajectory won't hit the dam body. Every Panzer gun crew paused a beat, barrels lowering but each gunner hesitating, peering through sights at UAVs smaller than pigeons, weaving between massive concrete pillars. 05 or 325. In the Ukrainian control bunker, 12 kilometers from the front lines, the technicians were tense to the point of suffocation. On the FPV screens, the red glow from the SCADA center's control tower gradually sharpened, reflecting on the dark river like a blood beacon. The operator whispered softly. 400 meters out, the four UAVs stuck tight in formation, moving in a fan pattern, each constantly varying altitude to evade optical locks. Panzer rounds tore through the night, whipping right past the cameras, shaking screens like earthquakes. But the UAV swarm miraculously survived. 05 or 340. Another UAV lost a wing to shrapnel, plunging straight into the river, vanishing in a muffled thud. The remaining three tightened up, hugging the dam bank, using the massive concrete structure itself as a shield, making it hard for Russian radars and firepower to lock on. The Mi-28N pilot circled, descending, but its thermal sights were blinded by water and dam reflections, targets reduced to flickering specks. 05 or 355. One Panzer crew decided to launch a 57E6 missile. The round streaked away, locking a UAV, warhead detonating to create a small fireball, shredding the UAV into thousands of fragments. The two survivors held, but one took engine damage from shrapnel, wobbling and staggering before splashing down. FPV signal went dark, leaving just one UAV. 05 or 45. The surviving UAV accelerated, zigzagging in an erratic path, fully exploiting the blind spot between two Panzer complexes. 30mm rounds screamed around it, bursts plowing the water, but the UAV escaped death by inches. The Mi-28N pilot bellowed, squeezing off another long burst, but was forced to veer the barrel to avoid rounds hitting the dam. That moment of hesitation opened the path to survival. On the FPV screen in the Ukrainian bunker, a secondary air intake vent on the control center came into view, a narrow black slit the size of a box, lost in the massive concrete expanse. The operator held his breath, pushing the stick to send the UAV straight at it. The entire Russian air defense network screamed in vain as the final target slipped through the gap, vanishing from all radars, sensors, and optical sights. The air battle over the Kakhovka Dam ended, leaving behind a sky lit by cannon fire, helicopter engines still roaring, and a chilling truth. 10 cheap UAVs had been wiped out 9, but just one survivor was enough to strike straight at the steel heart of the $8.7 billion fortress. 050415. The sole surviving KHS-7 UAV squeezed through the secondary air intake vent on the north face of the control center, vanishing from the view of all Russian radars and optical sights. The FPV camera instantly switched scenes, from the red glow of Panzer rounds outside to the cramped darkness of a metal duct. The space ahead was a damp maze, twisting turns, steel walls gleaming under infrared like the guts of a giant beast. Propellers vibrated wildly, each movement scraping the UAV against the duct walls, small sparks flashing on the screen, but it kept crawling deeper. In the bunker 12 kilometers away, the Ukrainian technician gripped the stick tight, heart pounding but hands steady as a surgeon's. He'd memorized the SCADA center's 3D blueprint for months. 30 meters of straight duct, a sharp left turn, 15-degree climb, then down a side branch. Each adjustment required a slight wrist twist of millimeters to keep the UAV body from scraping. Constant vibration alerts blared, but he ignored them, eyes locked on the pitch-black frame unfolding before him. Occasionally, the narrow duct left the props less than 2 centimeters from the walls. Jet wash swirling metal dust and fogging the lens. The operator tilted his head slightly, breathed deep, nudged the stick, and the UAV escaped by a hair. Avon 50450. The FPV camera flashed as the duct exit opened into a wider space. Ahead loomed a row of gray electrical cabinets taller than a man. LED lights blinking green and red, fans roaring like a chorus of engines. This was the SCADA heart, where all France's turbine and floodgate data converged. The operator clenched his fist, the screen showing a red icon, warhead armed. He pushed the control stick forward. Avon 50458. The UAV shot forward like a bullet, speed surging to 150 km/h, slamming through the narrow gap between 2 server racks. The FPV screen shook violently, then blinding white light flooded it. In the final instant, the only sound in the headset was the dry click of the detonator. The 1.5 kg-shaped charge activated, generating a copper plasma jet at over 8 kilometers less, slicing through 25 centimeters of steel and concrete casing like a hot knife through butter, ripping circuits and boards, turning the entire system into a charred black mass. 05043. The entire Kakhovka Dam control center went dark. Ceiling fluorescents flickered twice before plunging into blackness. Fans, screens, control panels, all fell silent at once. Russian engineers on duty froze, eyes fixed on instrument readouts, turned lifeless corpses. One rushed to flip the emergency breaker, but the entire power bus was scorched, reeking of melted plastic and copper. Outside the dam body, there was no earth-shattering blast, no towering inferno, just a thin wisp of black smoke seeping from the vent, dissipating in the Dnipro River wind. That was the only signal to the world that the steel heart of the $8.7 billion facility had been pierced by a tiny UAV, costing just a few $100, and the proud fortress now lay as a blind, helpless block of concrete. 050520. The thin black smoke still seeped from the vent on the Kakhovka Dam body. But inside, the truth was clear. The digital control center, worth tens of millions of dollars, had been nearly completely disabled. 80% of the electrical cabinets and SCADA server racks reduced to scorched metal lumps and blackened circuits. Initial reports from Russian engineers admitted rebuilding the entire center would take at least 24 months and over $60 million, not counting the near-impossible import of replacement control modules under sanctions. The dam body stood firm. The France's turbines remained, but the brain had been hollowed out. Russia kept the shell, but lost all precise operational and monitoring capability, like a massive tank blinded in both eyes. The strategic consequences hit immediately. The southern power grid wavered, floodgate flow coordination limited to bare minimum. Russian technical units were forced to throttle output, avoiding turbine overload risks without control systems. Ukraine, with just a cheap UAV swarm, had tied Russia's hands right at one of its most pivotal defensive economic facilities. A tiny 400 Dagger had paralyzed an $8.7 billion infrastructure asset, turning pride into a fatal weakness. The message of this strike echoed loud. In asymmetric warfare, no need for heavy cruise missile barrages, no need for mechanized Army Corps. Just a clever plan, compact tech, and patience could shift the balance. Those tiny hidden assassins could pierce the thickest steel armor, and more dangerously, they sowed an invisible fear in the enemy that no fortress was absolutely safe. As the last wisp of smoke dissolved into the Dnipro fog, one question still hung in the sky. If it were you, would you approve a mission sending a UAV right up to a strategic facility just seconds from man-made disaster in exchange for a mortal blow to the enemy's heart? The story of the KHS-7 UAV attack on the $8.7 billion Kakhovka Dam illustrates a new reality in modern warfare. Expensive steel shields don't always protect strategic targets. Russia had deployed a complex defense system, S-400 Triumphs, with 92 N-6E radars, Krasuka 4 electronic warfare vehicles, direct-fire Panzer S-1 complexes, even Mi-28N Havoc attack helicopters, yet all proved powerless against a 90-day clever plan, seamlessly combining opening Neptune missiles, Ghost Team Special Forces opening gaps, and a swarm of tiny UAVs costing just a few $100. The key detail was the sacrifice of 9 UAVs so that just one could slip into the secondary air intake vent, crawl through the twisting ducts, and hit the SCADA control center, the dam's brain. Result: 80% control system destruction, 18 to 24 months and over $60 million to restore, while the dam body remained intact but turned into a blind giant. This is a stark reminder for American citizens and U.S. leaders. 21st century power isn't just in weapon quantities or investment costs, but in intelligence, technology, and precise coordination. We can take pride that the U.S. military leads by many steps in this field, from stealth UAV systems, tactical AI control, to sea-land-air cyber coordination capabilities. The lesson is to keep investing in innovation and technology, for that's the true fortress against increasingly daring enemies. And to anyone plotting to challenge the United States, the Kakhovka story sends a cold warning. Even hiding behind billion-dollar fortresses, they'll be found, pierced and crushed by our intellectual power, technology, and resolve. If you find this story of how a tiny UAV could pierce an $8.7 billion fortress offers a fresh perspective on modern warfare, hit subscribe so you don't miss the next analyses. Thanks for joining me. See you in the next video, where we'll keep exploring battles that change the world.